Welcome to the blind zone. What is the blind zone? It's something that you never saw coming or something you refuse to see that was right in front of your face. And today's episode is going to be something that I refuse to see that was right in front of my face. We're going to be talking about the issue of pride. I was supposed to do this video at least 6 weeks ago. And for some reason, I was held off on doing it. So the Spirit told me why a couple days ago that I was supposed to do it now. And I will tell you, this is a painful, vulnerable, intense thing that I've been learning. And honestly, I was hoping that these blind zones would be much funnier than they are. And maybe I'm just supposed to do these so that I learn from them. But I'm going to share my story this morning with you about a pride issue. Back in the summer, I had read a book by Craig Groeschel called Dangerous Prayers. And there were three things he spotlighted in this book. You were to ask the Lord to search you, to break you, or to send you. Now, today we're just going to be talking about the search me part and not the break me and send me part. That'll be at some other point. So, in praying about the search me, you're basically supposed to use the psalm that David wrote and prayed, God, search my heart and know me and see if there be any wicked thing in me and bring it to my mind. Because again, we can try to change ourselves, but unless the Spirit changes us, nothing changes for us. And again, it's like, you're on the playground and you're hanging on by the chin-up bars by your hands, but at some point you're going to grow weary and drop. So this is not that event. This is where you're praying to the Lord. He's revealing something to you. And then through the power of the Spirit, it becomes a change in your life because the transformation happens from the inside out. So at the time of this prayer, I was also reading a devotional, which has become very important to me, and it's called Wake Up Call. And in this particular wake up call, the gentleman who's writing was a farmer. He was raised on a farm. And he was talking about how when you get a new field, what you have to do to it. The first thing you do is you cut off all the trees and you take all the logs out. Then you come in with a caterpillar and you take all the stumps out. And then you set the stumps aside and you start, you burn them, whatever. Then you attach a disker to the back of a tractor and you go up and down the field. And what you're doing is you're taking things from underneath the soil and you're bringing them to the top, because you can't put down good seed on soil that has things underneath that is going to impede the growth of the seeds. So you use this disker and you go up and down, and then as things come to the surface, you have a group of people go behind the disker and pick up all the things that came to the surface of the dirt. And you set those aside and you put them with the stumps to be burned. But you don't do this once. You do it over and over until at some point the disker doesn't bring too much more things to the surface. So is it 1 time, 2 times, 10 times? It doesn't matter. And even as the writer was saying this or writing about this, he indicated that even years later, some stuff that was buried deep, deep, deep still rise to the surface. So you'll never get it all, but you're to get the majority of it so that what you plant grows and has a better chance. So as I was thinking about that devotional, it brought up the thing about my pride. And it was like the Spirit was saying, I am the disker in your heart, and I'm going to go over and over, and I'm going to bring up the things that I don't want you to continue to do. And he said a few things. But the day after that, I was so depressed because I just kept feeling him disking through my heart and bringing up so many things that I didn't even know were there. So I got over that part and I vowed that if the Spirit wants me to learn from this, then I will. Because there are all things that we can grow and do in our lives that are going to be different. And if the Lord told you other things he was disappointed with you about, you'd never get out of bed. He tries to give them to you one at a time until you solve that one, and then he's got something else for you to grow and learn through. So while I was attempting to think about the pride issues in my own life, he brought the one to bear that I'm going to mention today. And I always thought it was funny, but I was with a pastor, and he was my spiritual mentor. And he had said everybody has one thing in their life that they'll carry from cradle to grave. Sometimes you'll get better at it. Sometimes it can almost overwhelm you, but you'll always carry this thing. And I knew immediately what mine was, and it was food. I've always had an issue with food. So, how today's lesson in pride bears out is because I was thinking of how ridiculous I have gotten with food, my weight, and it culminated in two stories that I'm going to share. The first one was I was going to the doctor, and if I'm not going to the doctor in the summer where I get to wear a really cute sundress and light lightweight shoes, then you have to wear more substantial clothes. And so I was in my bathroom like a lunatic. I'm so embarrassed. I was standing in my bathroom weighing out what clothes would weigh less so that when I got to the doctor's office, the weight of my clothes would not make me heavier than what I wanted them to believe I was. And truth be told, every time I even get on the scale, I say to the nurse, make sure you write down that I'm in my clothes. Like she would think I walked in the doctor's office, stripped off all my clothes, hopped on that scale. It was just totally ridiculous. And the other thing that I remembered was I was going to a cardiologist for the first time. And I got on the scale, and the nurse and I both saw what that number was. And she said to me, how tall are you? Well, I figured in my head how tall I would have to be so that that number wouldn't be too ridiculous. And I said I was 6'2". Now I'm standing there and she can see I'm not 6'2". I wasn't lying to anybody but myself. But I cannot even tell you how many days have been ruined when I got on the scale and it said something other than what I wanted. Now I can tell you I've been 40 pounds heavier, I've been 20 pounds lighter, I've been on more eating plans. I've done Fungus Link in South Beach, Eat to Live, Forks Over Knives, the Stephen Gundry Leaky Gut, and 20 other ones. I have more diet books than I ever had cookbooks. So I was getting really frustrated with this because I recognized this as a problem in my life. And then shortly after, a couple weeks after, I had read the Wake Up Call about how they use the Disker to bring things to the surface. He wrote another example that really spoke to my heart. He was talking about one time he and his cousin were driving through the hayfield, and they were trying to save some time, and they were cutting through the field. What they did not realize was inadvertently they had started a fire behind them because the metal had sparked and it started the fire. And as they looked around, there was no fire break. There was no way that this was going to be contained, and they didn't have water right there to put it out. So everybody started to do what they could, but his father attached the Disker back to the tractor and made big sweeping circles around the fire, which ultimately stopped the fire, and then they were able to contain the fire within the circle. So I thought about that the Spirit used the Disker in the first place to bring things up to the surface. And in the second place, he used the Disker as a way to contain what could be damaging and hold off things that, would stop me from growing. So he quelled the fire, he limited its growth, and he just said, I'm going to be there. I'm going to encircle you. It'll be okay. So I thought about why I wasn't able to do this pride lesson a couple weeks ago, because a couple weeks ago it was funny in my head. The difference was a couple weeks ago, I was listening to the condemnation of Satan telling me, see, you'll never fix this. You'll never get over this. This food thing's always going to be an issue. You're never going to overcome, what you've pretended in your head was just a little light way of living. It's just a food thing. But pride told me that's not what the Spirit wants. The Spirit wants me to overcome this. The Spirit wants me to through my total submission to him in this area, that he's going to help me overcome something that I have had as a lifelong issue. Whether I thought it was food scarcity, this is another ridiculous thing. And again, this is really painful for me today. I don't think I've ever been as vulnerable to anyone as I am to myself. I always thought that I had a food scarcity. And so when I first got here, I placed an Instacart order, and my bank called me and said there must be fraud because somebody's trying to buy $400 worth of food. And I said, no, I was really doing that. And when the food order came, I had ordered like 40 cans of soup, and I was acting like I was in a bunker and that I was never going to be able to go to the grocery store again. So I tell you all that to say that while I've always thought of food as a wrestling partner that I really didn't want, that I was always trying to overtake or overcome, I had to surrender that without the strength of the Spirit, the way I've done my life is going to continue. And I don't want that. Because what ultimately happens is when I'm not eating well, or I'm limiting what I'm eating to a real rigid thing, then I'm not getting all the bounty and the nourishment that I need to. And I've made it restricted. So I've made my food the law instead of doing it by the Spirit. Now, I'm not saying, because I don't eat junk food. Here's where I get to be prideful and tell you, I don't eat junk food. I don't eat sugar. And I don't eat sugar for a reason that I'll tell you at some later point. But I don't eat sugar and I don't eat junk food, and I try to eat well. But I guess I don't, because in a previous video, Mixed Messages, I told you that I never follow a recipe. I eat what's on hand. I eat what's quick. And I had gotten into a bad habit. And it's caused some intestinal distress that I'm still trying to deal with. So before there's a tipping point and I can't come back from it, I vowed that from today forward, I am going to make the changes necessary so that food is not the battering ram it's been in the past, that I will learn from the good examples that have been set before me, and then I will rely on the Spirit to tell me what it is I need to do and how it is I need to overcome that. So my pride in this instance was what the scale said. And while that's some useful information, it's not the whole story. Because I will also tell you, very embarrassingly, that I had 2 bouts of anorexia, one right after my divorce and another time much later, but it didn't last as long because I recognized it for what it was. So again, I have always been wrestling with the food and my flesh, and I wanted to stop because I want to honor the Lord more than I want to bow down to the food that has entrapped me. So there you have it. I should have told you to get a cup of coffee or tea before I started that, but thanks for listening. And again, pride is something I think we all struggle with, and this is just one facet of pride that I do want to overcome. So the next Blind Zone will be happier and more fun, and we'll have a guest that I'm sure will entertain. Anyway, thank you for listening today, and see you next time when we're once again in the Blind Zone.